so much all for coming. I'm going to start with this. I was going to start with an apology for the thing that fell over. Mostly for what will be very poor pronunciation of Swedish words and names. I'll start by saying I personally have had a very lucky career. I've had some very lucky invitations. I have met Paul McCartney. I've met President Clinton. I've met President Obama 4 times. But fitting right into that level of delight for me personally is to meet Maj, who has been, since I first read her books in 1976, and since then she's been an enormous hero of mine, and I could not believe when Adrian invited me to do this interview. So this is a total thrill for me, and I hope I don't come over all fanboy. I want to start by asking, you have had obviously a long and distinguished and accomplished life. These people, we're here at Crimefest, and we're really here for Martin Beck, which was 50 years ago, the first book.
Yeah.
Lasted 10 years, and so we're talking about a 10-year period of your life, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Does it bother you to be always talking about that? Are there other things we should be talking about?
No, I don't think so, because, I mean, I'm not only these 10 years a crime writer, but in this situation I am. I mean, this is what we're talking about, yeah. Not what I did the rest of my life.
But does that in some way, I mean, it must have impacted the previous part of your life, must obviously led to those 10 years.
Of course, yes.
And so let's talk about those. You must remember, obviously, growing up in Sweden from the 40s onwards, I would think you would remember 40s and 50s. Mm. So let's pretend this is not a crime convention, but a romance convention. Tell us about those years, what you did, how you met Per, and so on.
Yeah, I was grown up in the middle of Stockholm. My father was the chief of a hotel. In the building was also a restaurant and a theater. And I was born in 35. Which means that I was between 4 and 9 years old during the Second World War. And at that time, of course, everything kind of stopped in Sweden. So the borders were closed. Nothing happened. There was no traffic. I was growing up in the main town of Sweden, but it was like a small town.
And the hotel was empty, I presume, most of the time?
It was full of Nazis, I think. I don't know, but you never, as a child, it was mostly exciting to be in a country with peace, mm-hmm. But inflicted by the war, mm-hmm. And what you call it, the dark shades. And so when I was a teenager, everybody started to go out of Sweden. Things were coming into Sweden, bananas and oranges and foreigners, and people started, my friends used to go to Paris. I was not allowed, my father was very good. I was not allowed to go outside Sweden. But this was a very exciting time, and it was, of course, changing very fast after the 50s.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to ask about, because part of, in a funny way, part of the Beatles legend is that Ed Sullivan flew into London just at the same time as the Beatles were returning from Sweden,
Yeah.
and saw the massive fans that were waiting for the Beatles at Heathrow, and he said, who are these people and what are they for? Beatles coming back from Sweden. So Sweden this must have been the end of 1963. It must have been pretty hopping by then.
Yeah. What kind of what?
It was the youth scene in Sweden. Was it exciting by the end of 1963?
Oh yes, of course. Everything was new. I mean, during the 50s, or during the war, there was a cafe in Stockholm where my brother was always went to listen to the American jazz.
Okay.
And that was smuggled in. So that was Charlie Parker, Esther Young, that kind of music.
Right.
But then came in the 50s, came the
rock and roll.
The rock and roll.
Yeah.
And mainly through England. And it was Cliff Richard, of course. And
sorry about that.
and then, of course, the Beatles changed very much.
They did. The Beatles changed everything, and in England, I'm a little younger than you, and I was about 10 years old at that time, and England was very exciting, but we had, from somewhere, we had an image of Sweden as a kind of paradise where all the girls were pretty and they would sleep with you, and we thought Sweden was perfect. But the point, I think, of your early life and career was that it wasn't perfect. Can you explain that to a bemused English person what was wrong with Sweden? It looked pretty good to me.
Well, I mean, you're right about the girls. But during the 60s, and that's why we wrote our book, Sweden was turning from a very social democratic country to a more and more right-wing country. And of course, it's very difficult to tell people who look in the mirror backwards to describe the evolution during the 60s. It went very slowly, and it happened at the same time. Of course, there is also, if power is pressing you down, you press up. So what was also happening during the 60s were small theatre groups, and that's also very important that during the time when we wrote our books was exactly the same years when the Vietnam War was on, which meant that students and left wings were very lively. We had many demonstrations, and so from outside it could really look like we were some kind of a combination of socialism and capitalism. And then we got this Olof Palme, who was a very, very good public relation man for Sweden. And he made